a bad actor is able to maybe create a profile, and because now we're dealing with the issue of online impersonation and identity theft, so it will be much easier for the attacker to create that kind of attack against you. So on the internet, we say that less is more. Also, the issue of multi-factor authentication, I think we talked about that. In addition to the traditional username and password, there's need for enhanced authentication. For example, there are applications that you can use to safeguard your systems. In addition to the username and password, a code may be sent to your phone, or you can use an authentication application just for an extra level of security. The issue of passwords at organization level, just enhancing password policies. Passwords should have timelines or expiry dates. And also you should enforce, those alphanumerical standards so that users are not able to use weak passwords. Also, at a personal level, the use of public Wi-Fis. I always advocate for people to, if you're at an airport, if it's possible, I'd rather you hotspot. If you really need to access some sensitive information, you'd rather use your hotspot than using the public Wi-Fis, because an attacker could easily create a Wi-Fi that mimics the public Wi-Fi at such places, and they're able to harvest your sensitive information. Also, keeping your devices updated and keeping your servers updated at organizational level. There's a reason why those patches are released, because perhaps some vulnerability has been discovered. So even your mobile phone, most of us would maybe leave it for later because you're busy. You don't maybe your day to be interfered with. You need to make those calls. You need to respond to those emails. But it's just good practice to keep your devices updated. Also, with regard to the financial information, we should always try to monitor our financial transactions. Now we have mobile banking, online banking, so there's need to actually keep a close eye on the transactions that are happening on your account, so that in case of any irregularities, you'll raise it and take it up with the relevant authorities. To the second part of your question, I'm out of time. Okay, fine. I think I'll just wind up. With regard to some of the steps that Kenyan citizens, to protect Kenyan citizens from cyber criminals, I think the issue of public partnerships cannot be overemphasized. The private sector is a key player within the cybersecurity value chain, because in as much as government might try to develop regulations and gazette various infrastructures, at the end of the day, it's the private sector that is actually the administrators and the owners of this system, so there is need to continue promoting and enhancing those PPP frameworks. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Today, time is not our friend, so pardon me for keeping on interrupting you. Where even for children, they've got a lot of online safety programs where parents can learn. You even have your Cyber Soldiers game, where children using a game platform can learn online safety, because one of the problems we're having is with this cyberbullying coming up quite a bit, is that the suicide age in Kenya has unfortunately dropped to 7 years, because people are more vicious online than they would be to your face. So it's imperative that what we're talking about and what Meta are doing about enhancing capacity amongst our children and how to stay safe online, go to KCERT's platforms. Okay, my next question goes to Adam. Adam. Oh, and before I jump to Adam, and I was given this instruction by Gigi, so let me say what I was told. Before we move on to our next question, I would like to remind all participants that at the end of this panel session, we will have a 15-minute plenary session, so you can raise your questions and or comments then. So start accumulating them. We're going to have a very short one because I know I'm standing between you and coffee or lunch. So, yeah. Adam, in your role as a government affairs liaison, you're best placed to answer this next question. In what ways can the Kenyan government collaborate or has collaborated with the private sector entities to promote a safe and secure online environment for all citizens? And I know you're in hardware, but you're one of our most popular hardware, so you know what's happening out there. Additionally, how can public-private partnerships be leveraged to enhance cybersecurity infrastructure, develop robust incident response mechanisms, and facilitate information sharing in real time? As a troll goes cold in the blink of an eye in cyberspace, and so expeditious information sharing mechanisms are vital. Finally, in your opinion, what role should be played by the various multi-stakeholder groups to curb cybercrime in Kenya and promote online safety amongst our population? So you have 5 minutes, and I have my timekeeper who flashes the light.
Okay, hopefully I don't think I'll need 5 minutes, but I think we've talked a little bit about collaboration on capacity building, awareness raising and training in terms of, and there's a lot of really useful resources. I don't know if they can still be maybe improved and become more accessible, but certainly the CIA have an app. How many people here have ever heard of or downloaded or used the CERT app? Can you put their hand up? Anyone? Okay, so we need some awareness raising about the CERT app.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there? On that note, as we're talking, go to Play Store, whether you're on iOS or Android, and look for the Communications Authority app.
The CERT app.
The CERT app, the KCERT app, KECIRT. It's blue, black, and white coloring.
There's also the Child Online Protection materials and curriculum, I think, that's been developed, and a really useful game called the Cyber Soldiers game that was launched, I believe, like last February, March last year, that the CIA also developed. So actually some really useful materials the government has that then private sector can utilize and promote and use in their programs without having to reinvent the wheel. And of course, if it's developed by government, it's kind of approved or authorized kind of content that's good. So I think that's the first thing. So we're very keen on doing that. Actually next week there'll be the official launch of the boot camp and training programs and hackathons leading up to Oxfam, as was mentioned earlier by the CIA representative here. And of course there's a huge need to share global experiences. As a global multinational company, we work, I think, in every country around the world. There's lots of really interesting things happening on the regulatory space, in the technology space, in collaborative and alliances and voluntary initiatives as well. So that's also really, really important. I know the CIA actually is very, very engaged in global agencies and regional agencies, especially the ITU study groups and things like that as well. And that's actually really useful. It's a place where private sector and governments and non-profits come together, and that's actually really important. I mentioned a couple other things. At the moment, I think there's still some areas where we have to improve in Kenya. At the moment, a lot of equipment that's imported into Kenya has to be approved, type approved, in order to be imported. And that's really good, and that's a great way of setting standards and enforcing them, because otherwise they won't get approved and they can't get imported through the KenTrade system. That does leave some gaps. That only really works for hardware that's imported, but there isn't such a system necessarily for software. So how do you know software may meet some standards, for example? Or you are reliant on the software like Play Stores and these kind of providers that third parties, or maybe the cloud providers that host some software and things as well. So I think there's a really interesting question around that space. If there are standards around security and privacy, how do you enforce them if they're not just being through the imported kind of mechanism? The second one, and of course that there's a lot that's developed domestically, right? A lot of hardware was developed domestically and a lot of software as well. So it's not just if it's being imported, it goes to KenTrade. KenTrade I think only applies to imported equipment, so that's another issue we need to work on. The other one, and I think actually this is where Oxfam is really good. Last year at the Oxfam event, the October Cybersecurity Conference, there was a really good simulation that was run between private sector and government and everyone together. I believe that will happen again this year as well. And simulations are very, very useful tools where real-life examples can be replayed and improved upon, or theoretical or possible scenarios can be developed and discussed. And it's only actually through that where you can develop the lines of communication, work out who is who, and then be really prepared for when these things may come up in the future. So simulation is something I think we're also keen to do more and more together with government and other stakeholders, because these things are very complex, as you know. I wanted to mention that. And I think the other thing, of course, is engaging with the regulatory space. I think, as Dr. Ngundi mentioned earlier, that the cybersecurity regulations being developed to implement the CMCA that was a few years old now, and I think private sector want to be involved in that process and comment on it. And it's up to us to be actively engaged, as well as on government to be open, and of course they do that normally as well. I also note that we have a representative from the ODPC here. I guess she'll be speaking later. So of course we also want to be very engaged in that space and meet the regulations and the requirements and have that conversation, because the space is always evolving. Some of these regulations cannot always keep up. So it also has to be a very two-way bilateral communicative process as well. And last thing, I guess I'll just say, I think the media has also an important role to play. And I don't know if we have many media representatives here. Do we have media here?
Yes, we have media, Cecilia, I know.
Oh, we have one, okay. So we definitely have to engage more in the media space. Social media, of course, we have covered, I think, from the private sector here. Though there's others who are not here as well. I know KFCB, I think, has been quite engaged in this space as well, engaging with all the other social media companies, but there's definitely something we need to do around that space. Let me stop there, thank you.
Thank you for that. And I can see my timekeeper smiling, so it means we're doing good. And you know, when you talked about the whole concept of engaging, I think in Kenya we proved that we do engage. We've got NC4, you know, sitting on the platform with us. We've got our regulator sitting on the platform with us, you know. We've got the private sector, you know, sitting here. And we've got me, who represents the legal fraternity, sitting here. So, and we've got a whole array that we found in here. So kudos to KickToNet team for even bringing us all together for something like this. Sam, I'm going to, and there's a very valid point you raised there, which hopefully the people who are in the know will take up. Regards Kentrade and software and hardware cyber-proofing for local developments, especially because of the UDA plan of developing more of those things locally. Sam, you tried to disown us, but you're one of us at the beginning. You're our panel's cloud security guru. So my next question will be directed to you. And like your fellow panelists, you can see my timekeeper with his flashing lights. We have 5 minutes. How can organizations in Kenya effectively manage access controls and user permission in the cloud to prevent unauthorized access? Further, can you briefly tell us how does cloud security differ from traditional on-premises security measures, and what steps should organizations take to adapt their security strategies? Additionally, what are the potential risks and vulnerabilities associated with third-party cloud service providers, and how can organizations mitigate against those risks? Finally, how can small and medium-sized enterprises in Kenya enhance their cloud security posture with limited resources and budgets, as they have become easy targets for cyber criminals who are now turning their focus to them?
Cool. So thanks for that. So that's 5 questions in 5 minutes. Right? So I would start with access permissions and controls of the cloud. I think first it's important for us to understand what it actually is. The cloud literally just refers to where resources now sit. I mean, instead of having your own server, you're renting capacity. So rather than going into the details, if you look at the root of the problem is actually the actual people accessing the resources in the cloud. So in tackling the root, I think I find in my line of work, the greatest efficacy when it comes to improving posture comes from investing in technologies and in education where you
you essentially limit the amount of damage a user can do, right? And I think that that speaks towards what now is popularly referred to as zero trust. What I deliver to you is based on who you are and your posture and your health, just enough access to do what you need to do, right? And so that limits the amount of damage that you can do. So one of the fallacies is that investing in cybersecurity means that you won't get hit. But really the school of thought shifts to cyber resiliency. Do you have visibility over what people are doing? And if something does happen, how quickly can you identify that there's an incident and how quickly can you recover? And so the investment in people shouldn't be underappreciated or it can't be understated. So I think that would be the first thing. To your second question, how cloud security differs from on-premise security, something has been happening and I think was really accelerated by COVID. It's what we refer to as de-perimeterization. So everything was in one office, everyone comes there, everyone accesses. There are the traditional ways of giving remote access, and now everything is literally everywhere. Again, it speaks to where compromise always happens, which is typically with the user, and more people, attackers literally just log in, and so you exploit trust. In fact, with one attack, public knowledge that happened with Cisco, even with multi-factor authentication, so many requests were sent that eventually the guy probably just fat-fingered approve, right? But even with that, obviously there are other mitigations you do internally to prevent the scope of the damage that can be done, and little was done anyway. But it's very important to understand and insist on a focus on the end user. Now, because you can't expect the public to be secured like an enterprise, and I think my colleague from NC4 mentioned this, and also from the CA. Consider how people actually access the internet, and in emerging markets like our own, the primary way is via 3G, 4G, right? And so there are things that you can do to prevent that from happening. I mean, we're all familiar with a relatable example would be Truecaller. We all have the marketing numbers on spam and we don't pick them up. The internet has a phone book. It's called DNS. The CA has its early warning infrastructure, which is super useful. But obviously, the telcos need to make the investment in actually using that information. And we've done it for it's already being done with enterprises. It can be done at the telco level. So rather than continuously admonishing the users, oh, you need to be aware, you need to do this, it isn't their priority, but they do depend on the internet as we would all consider critical national infrastructure as a tool for commerce. And so the service providers, by providing a means to reduce that surface area of attack, will probably solve 60 to 70% of the problems we have. Literally, because when you're on the internet, you spend 70 to 80% of your time in a browser, and the balance reading email or doing word processing or something like that. So again, the telcos become a critical point. As regards risks with third-party service providers, I would like to sound like a broken record and say that focus on the user, focus on the user, focus on the user. Reducing the level of trust we have with people accessing resources is a big thing. It's straightforward enough to secure resources running in infrastructure that's being provided to you as a service, and that's more of a commercial decision. More and more it becomes, with this shift to hybrid work, where a large percentage of the workforce is remote, the level of visibility that you can get needs to change by, again, focusing on the endpoint and seeing what they're doing and controlling how they access these resources in the cloud. And to your last question, 3.5 minutes in, small and medium enterprises, how can they secure the security posture with limited budget and resources? It depends. I mean, you only invest in what's important to you. If you are driving a car, you're mandated to have insurance because the cost of an accident without it means you're liable for both your repairs and the person whose car you've also hit. It's the same thing. How important is the internet to your business? So I'd like to take a more pragmatic approach. If you're an online business, say for example, if you are it's a patronizing term, a mamamboga, because there are also men who sell vegetables in Margiti. If you're in Margiti trading at 4 a.m. in the morning, your focus is probably M-Pesa or some app where you're lending. And so then, again, the telco is responsible for making sure these services are up and running. One, educating their users as far as how they're used, but people are being phished on mobile money. So it then becomes an issue of most people are using their SIM applications to access M-Pesa. But if there was a transition to using the application, say for example, a mobile money application directly, then more controls can be enforced. Before you do something, if you're making a request, potentially looking at phishing messages on the network and seeing, hey, who's sending messages that look like phishing messages and restricting those, a way to collect that information. As far as businesses that are actually online, most businesses trade in social media marketplaces. So as a business, what you should be doing is protecting yourself from your account getting compromised. So like my colleague again from the CA was saying, two-factor authentication. But on kind of reducing the overall surface area of attack, I would say secure the internet's phone book, secure DNS, make sure that at least there's a basic level. And it is significant because it does reduce that surface area by an order of maybe like 70, 80%, and then deal with the rest. Deal with most of the problem and like eat the cake in bite-sized chunks. Right.
I love that. You know, we need to reduce our cyber threat landscape because already with a cyber attack on the global average happens every 39 seconds, you know. You've got the statistics that they tell us what they're picking up, so I love that. And I also love the fact that the internet is not just infrastructure, it's actually a human right, you know, so we need to secure it adequately. Martin in London, hi. My last question for today, because I have been told we're running out of time, is directed to you. And you two are going to have 5 minutes. So there is a global cybersecurity talent shortage, and you've heard us this morning all talking about capacity building, upskilling, needing to bring more people into the market. And Kenya also needs to do this. To enhance the number of cybersecurity professionals, we have to better secure our cyberspace. How can we ensure that all Kenyan citizens, regardless of their social-economic background, have access to essential cybersecurity resources, and education as a human factor is the weakest link in keeping our cyberspace safe, be it accidental or malicious? Additionally, how can we encourage young Kenyans to pursue careers in cybersecurity and develop the necessary skills to combat cyber threats effectively? Finally, what are the challenges faced in building the technical skills required for cybersecurity professionals in Kenya, and how can those be addressed? And because as GFCE and you sit at the AU level, what 2 or 3 lessons can we learn from other jurisdictions that you can throw into your answer? So, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Allow me to wear 2 hats. So the first one is the Kenyan hat, which is what I want to wear. And then I'll address those issues in that sequence. And then I'll come back to the GFCE and how we can go forward at a global level. Now, when you look at, I'm reminded first of all that when you look at a society and how the society treats its vulnerable, it then explains how human that society is. And that also applies in how we treat our experts. And do we take them at value, especially when it comes to issues of cybersecurity and any other profession? And when you look at the Kenyan scenario, and these are statistics and data that are already in public domain, you will find that there is a huge increase in terms of cyber security professionals that are needed in the country. In fact, the figures that are there are between 40 to 50,000 on a yearly basis that are required in those particular professions. There is a very interesting paper, which of course anyone is free to look at. I think it's a brother looked at how to close the security skills gap in Kenya. I think it was written, I think it was published actually this year. There are some very interesting statistics there, whereby they actually look at the issue around the curriculum of universities today in Kenya. Only 30% of that curriculum addresses cybersecurity as a subject, whether it's a diploma, bachelor's, or master's, or PhD degrees. We only have 2 universities in the country today that actually offer PhDs in cybersecurity, and that is, of course, there's Kabarak University and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology, who offer PhD. I know Strathmore, they offer masters, and other universities, or USIU, they do a lot of collaboration and so forth. So therefore, when you look at the uptake in terms of curriculum level, then there are some questions that we need to address. These areas are looking at 3 or 4 issues in terms of how we are increasing capacity. So today, we are having partnerships, which of course, my colleague Mercy talked about the partnerships with Meta and other collaborators, GIZ and others who are collaborating very, very effectively in raising awareness. So we are seeing partnerships as one level of entry where the private sector, and I know Huawei who are also talking about government collaboration, are engaging with institutions of higher learning in order to be able to put forward the issues of awareness in cybersecurity. We are also looking at certification. Now, there is also the issue around certification, and this is what has been taken up by many of the colleges and universities, where they are offering specific certifications, whether it is ISACA-led type of certification, or whether it is ICES and CISSP and so forth, where people can gain this particular knowledge in cybersecurity. And then, of course, we have the hackathons, which are taking place maybe yearly. And I think Ngundi, my good friend, talked about how CA and other institutions are pushing forward in terms of ensuring that everybody is aware, and also things like degree programs that I've talked about. So therefore, if you look at the landscape of the country, there is a huge need for us to push forward the needle so that we can be able to address the issues of skills and shortages of skills when it comes to cybersecurity as a subject matter or as an area of concern. There are specific things that we can do. Number one is the issue of addressing the certification. Certification has to be coordinated. We have to make sure that we have adequate institutions that can offer certification, but also create the demand so that people who are satisfied. I know there was a law that went somewhere quite far that was trying to really look at that area of how do we create order when it comes to cyber and related areas, and who is actually qualified to offer a service. So certification is an interesting area which we need to make sure that there is some order there in that area. And then there is how do we encourage universities to be able to offer degree programs, create a curriculum that is conducive, that addresses the issues in the streets today. And that's something that many of the universities, and I know there are so many professionals in the room, who can be able to go back and look at their curriculum, both from primary, secondary, tertiary university institutions, and even universities. How do we encourage numbers to be increased there? So that's something that needs to be to have some intervention, whether it's at policy level or just at the institutional level. And then, of course, there is the area around awareness and outreach, which many of the organizations in the room and many of the partners have been keen on. How do we raise awareness, and how do we make sure that people are able to understand cybersecurity not only just as a subject area, but just as a way of life. And that's actually where we are going to. There are some examples that I can provide, especially in the continent, that Kenya also seems to be doing very well in those areas. Sure that we enhance our research and development. POSA is a very good example of an institution or an entity that will be able to harness the knowledge, to harness the expertise that is requested. I know there are so many efforts that are going into attracting people into Konza to make sure that we can build that. That should be taken much, much further so that many institutions and funding has to be provided in that kind of area. There is the issue of sustainability. And sustainability is very, very, very important. When we build any of these particular initiatives, or if we start the issues of looking at how we generate skills and support skills, we have to think about sustainment. And this is something that I think in the room we have to take it in further to make sure that every time we build either a framework or any time we talk about how we can build something, we need to look at how do we sustain those particular programs so that they can actually live longer than the planned period. There are also issues around the urgent intervention, especially at the higher organs. And I'm looking specifically at the legislature and the executive of the country. And this is not specifically for Kenya, but in many, many countries that I've seen, we need interventions at that level because many of the legislators do make decisions that affect you and I, especially when it comes to the education and the curriculum. And cybersecurity is no exception. So these legislators need to have the knowledge, they need to have the skill set that actually enable them to make the necessary decision. And I'll give you an example. Institutional memory is an important component because when we train parliamentarians will live for maybe 5 to 7 years and they will move away. But it's important that we make sure that that's done. And lastly, it's the issue around self-reliance. I think we need to teach ourselves about the adequacy of hard work and instilling a sense of responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That this morning's deliberation with this amazing panel has been very insightful, very illuminating. So thank you, gentlemen. And I think, as I keep on saying, you copy what your big sisters do. So me, I'm copying what Gigi did. And since I stood up to represent academia when academia was shy to stand, although Paula was here and she heads tech in USIU, so I'm wondering why she was shy to stand. But anyway, key words that have run through our panel today have been all threats technically are human-centric. And so that's the weakest link, and that weakest link in securing our cyberspace. And this is where a lot of cyber hygiene capacity building right across the nation, from all sectors, all fields, all levels, needs to be done. Secondly is upskilling. We need to upskill and enhance the number of cyber professionals we have. The word that you're going to hear all through today's conference is multi-stakeholder and partnerships. Cybersecurity cannot operate in a silo. We need the multi-stakeholder partnership approach. Sustainability, we want this theme of today's conference to go not just to end today, but to continue way beyond this. Finally, the two closing things I want to mention is, I don't know if we have anybody from the insurance sector in the room. So maybe next time we need to bring in the insurance sector, because earlier on we mentioned that data protection in the cybersecurity world is one of the best cyber resilience tools. Another great cyber resilience tool is cyber insurance. Because if you have a cyber insurance policy, you're less likely to pay the ransomware. However, cyber insurance is very expensive, and I know our reinsurers were talking about its unaffordability, and if they can't afford it, then they can't offer services to the insurance sector, and in turn, we, the end users, can't get those policies. So in Kenya, and indeed on the global stage, we may have to borrow from what the Americans did after 9/11, when they enacted their TRIA, the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, where the government became the reinsurer to the cyber insurance, domestic terrorism industry. So we may need to go that way because ransomware, I'm sure you guys. In London as well. I would like to thank Kictonet for having brought us together. And with that, we bring this session to a close. Thank you very much.